Thank you all for coming today. My name's Detective Superintendent Peter Reid, and with me is Superintendent John Price, the District Commander for Canterbury. On the 22nd of February 2011 at 12:51 p.m, a magnitude 6.3 earthquake struck here in Canterbury. As you know, 185 people were killed. The single biggest loss of life occurred at the CTV building, which collapsed with the loss of 115 lives. Since 2014, police have been investigating the collapse of the CTV building with the purpose of establishing any criminal culpability and the prospect of criminal prosecution. This has been a very complex and technical investigation. We have sought a large amount of expert advice, reconstructed and examined certain structural elements of the building, conducted computer modelling, and excavated the CTV site. We've also sought legal reviews by the Christchurch Crown Solicitor and Crown Law. The investigation identified significant deficiencies in the building's design, and police considered charges of negligent manslaughter. The Solicitor General's prosecution guidelines were applied, as they are to all prosecution decisions we make. At the beginning of October this year, we said that the issues before us were finely balanced. We have now decided that after very careful consideration of all the information available to us, the evidence is not sufficient to provide a reasonable prospect of conviction. A further legal obstacle was identified by Crown Law. This relates to the length of time between the conduct of certain individuals and the deaths occurring. This is a further barrier to prosecution. We are acutely aware that there will be disappointment with this decision, particularly for the families and friends of those who died in this tragedy. There is no doubt the issues have been very difficult, particularly as legal advice and expert opinion has evolved and changed as the investigation progressed. Ultimately, however, our decision must be based on the evidence and the thresholds that we must meet. It is not simply a matter of letting the court decide. Under the Solicitor General's prosecution guidelines, we must be satisfied that there is a reasonable prospect of conviction before we can bring a prosecution. We must then prove our case beyond reasonable doubt. This applies to any criminal matter which we put before the courts. We've today released a number of documents to give people a better understanding of the issues involved and the difficulties we have faced. These documents include the expert advice that we got and the legal opinions we received. I particularly draw your attention to the comments of Crown Law. This gives a more detailed explanation of the legal issues involved. Some will question why the findings of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the CTV collapse did not give us the evidence we need. There is no doubt the Royal Commission was a detailed and thorough examination of the issues involved. However, its evidence and findings are not in themselves sufficient to meet the prosecution test, even with the further information gathered during our investigation. I can assure everyone touched by this tragedy that police has worked tirelessly and diligently on the investigation. I would like to acknowledge the commitment and professionalism of the police staff involved and all those who contributed to the investigation. The families of the victims were informed of this decision earlier today. It is my intention to meet with the families in the next 2 weeks to discuss the decision further and answer their questions. Finally, we again extend our deepest sympathies to all those who lost loved ones in the CTV building. This tragedy affected not only New Zealanders but also families around the world who suffered the loss of loved ones. The victims included a member of the New Zealand Police. Our thoughts are very much with those families who have been impacted by this tragedy. I'll now answer any questions.
Why is no one being held accountable for a building that did not comply with the code of the day and had unconsented work done?
We have to measure criminal culpability against the Solicitor General's guidelines. At the end of the day, we have to establish that there is evidential sufficiency. That is one of the main cause of the Solicitor General's guidelines, and we didn't meet evidential sufficiency, or we couldn't meet evidential sufficiency in this case.
What other charges did you look at?
Negligent manslaughter was the only one we looked at. We did consider at the start the possibility of criminal nuisance, but criminal nuisance, according to the legal advice we got, was an inappropriate charge to consider.
Why?
It required a different form of proof. It related to recklessness. Recklessness, in many respects, is harder to prove in a criminal setting than it is than the negligent manslaughter charge that we considered.
You say there was insufficient evidence. What more evidence did you need?
Insufficient evidence related to gross negligence and getting to the point of gross negligence. Also, there was the prospect of securing a conviction. So that is one of the, as I said, one of the key parts of the Solicitor General's guidelines, that we have to establish that we're likely to achieve a conviction. And all of the legal opinions that we got and the police recommendation was that we were unlikely to get a conviction if we undertook one.
To what extent did you weigh in the likely cost and complexity of the trial?
That doesn't really come into account. It does, but from our perspective, the cost of it was not the relevant part. What was it? We did consider it. We did consider it, but it was minimal when you think about what we were trying to achieve, which was to ensure that the families and those that have lost loved ones would ensure justice at the end of the day for them.
Complexity did not come into this decision?
Minimal, it did, but not a big part of it. The evidential sufficiency was the main catalyst for us, and that element is what we were focused on. The other parts come under public interest.
How much did the investigation cost?
1.18 million.
That doesn't include the cost of our staff. We had a dedicated team on this for up to 4 years. We've had a team of very experienced, very capable, some of the best detectives in the New Zealand Police working on that, and that's been their full-time job up until now.
How does that compare to other investigations carried out by the Canterbury Police?
This would be the biggest investigation we've had to hold, and there's a very good reason for that, and that is because many lives were lost, and we needed to make sure that we did the best we could possibly do. It's my belief we could not have done anything more than what we have done.
Can you define what you mean by biggest staff?
As in time, the complexity. This was not a simple investigation. There were a lot of elements involved in it. You're also talking about a lot of lives that were lost. There were 115 lives lost, and therefore that's why we mounted this inquiry and investigation to see if there was any culpability. And we've got to the stage now that we've looked at it and we've ascertained that there is not culpability enough to go to court.
So considering the complexity and the cost and the time, is there frustration from your end that this has ended in no prosecution?
We're certainly disappointed that we couldn't satisfy the needs and wants of the families, but we did everything we could to do that. But ultimately we have to measure the evidence that we gather against the Solicitor General's guidelines. And even though if I'd taken my heart's advice, we would have prosecuted. But I can't take my heart's advice. I have to use my head, and I have to compare it against and measure it against the Solicitor General's guidelines.
What do you say to the families that don't believe they've had justice, and it's just taken, and it's taken nearly 7 years to find?
We've done everything that we possibly could to achieve a prosecution outcome for them. If the evidence isn't there, we're not going to manufacture it. We have to deal with the facts that we're presented with, and the facts just didn't get us across the threshold.
Can I just touch on your heart's advice? are you implying that the law should be changed in some way? And I'm thinking
Not at all.
specifically of the year and a day law that prohibited you
Not
from
at,
going forward.
not at all, but in the solicitor, the Crown Law advice that has been released on the website, they've said that the year and a day legislation has been referred to the Law Commission as something that possibly shouldn't be there any longer. But that's a decision that they've made.
And we fully understand that the families will be greatly disappointed by this decision. And believe me, we have anguished over this. We have sought legal advice from our Crown solicitor all the way through to the Crown Law. We've tested the law, we've asked questions of the law, and we've now come to the decision based upon the advice and recommendations made to us. Hence why we're making all those documents available to the families and to everyone else to look at.
What would your message now be to the families?
Oh, my message is simply my deepest sympathy goes out to them, and our thoughts go to them as well as they try to comprehend the decision that we've made. So we fully understand where they're at. We want to meet with them, and we will be meeting with them very soon so that they can ask questions of the process, of the system. But look, we've had an extremely dedicated team look at this. They've been working with the families. They've got to know those families very closely. This is our town, this is our city. We want to make sure that if justice needs to be done, it will be done.
Those meetings, what will they look like and what's the time frame? I think 2 weeks was mentioned, but is there any more detail?
2 weeks, 14th of December, we'll be meeting with the Christchurch families. We'll have representatives from Crown Law Wellington will be there, and the Crown Solicitor from Christchurch will be there to answer questions for the families, along with police, obviously, and our investigation team will be there as well. And a week after that, we are meeting with the Japanese families in Tokyo.
We'll also have some of those experts because the complexity of this investigation around the engineering of the building and such like means that, to answer some of the questions, we will have some of the subject matter experts there to assist in answering the questions. And there will be many questions.
On the year and a day law, which you're referring to as would have been a complete bar to prosecution in any case, I think is what you're saying. So are you saying that that's been interpreted to mean that the minute that the two designers had finished their work at whatever point that might be, they therefore hold no obligation?
Well, the debate.
That just seems
Yeah.
improbable and wrong.
The debate that we had was in the police contention was, and the Crown Solicitor as well, that the omission that we were alleging continued for the life of the building as it was standing up, and the year and a day didn't come into effect until the building collapsed. Crown Law had a different view of that, and their view was that as soon as the design of the building was finished, the year and a day started, which meant that when the building collapsed and caused the deaths, that a considerable time later.
It's a lot easier for engineers today then, hasn't it, if that's the interpretation of that law?
Yes.
Because that's preposterous, isn't it?
No, it's not it is the law. We have to work within the law.
Well, no,
So
you just said it's Crown Law's interpretation of
Yes.
that law.
yes.
Did you get that tested by elsewhere?
Well, the Crown Solicitor later agreed with that test and said that
Did you go to any other legal experts other than the Crown Solicitor and Crown Law?
no, Crown Solicitor and Crown Law.
So that may well be judicially reviewable, that interpretation.
Not in the opinion that we've got.
Why didn't police start investigating this case then the day after the building collapsed?
We did start to gather evidence around the investigation from day one. Our point of duty at the time was around life and saving lives. Then very shortly after that, we did start to gather evidence around all buildings.
So why are we So, okay, so why has it taken so long then? I mean, this actual investigation that's concluded today started 3 years ago, but so you were saying that it actually started...
So the Royal Commission, there was the Building and Housing report, then there was the Royal Commission, which didn't finish its findings until late 2012. We assessed those findings with an engineer and a lawyer and a senior police officer for about 8 months until the end of 2013, and that's when we contacted Becca and then started reviewing all of that evidence, and it wasn't until August 2014 that we announced that we were commencing a criminal investigation.
So all of those other inquiries prevented a police investigation from taking place, is that what you're saying?
Well, when you looked at those at first glance, they didn't meet the threshold that we needed to at first glance, and that's why we actually needed to have a thorough examination of those before we actually commenced and committed to undertaking a criminal investigation.
So I'm a bit confused. So until you'd seen the outcome of the Royal Commission, you weren't sure whether or not this met the standard? Is that what you're saying? Or?
You'll have to repeat the question,
So
sir.
police began looking at this case pretty soon after the rescue phase finished.
Yeah.
What were you looking at that stage? What were you investigating?
We were assisting other agencies with gathering evidence.
So we had the coronial investigation as well, which was taking place and running parallel to everything. So we were waiting for the outcome of the Building and Housing investigation report, which then led into the Royal Commission, which had all that expert advice in the hearings. And from that's when we picked it up from a criminal perspective and said, well, we need to actually assess the report, the Royal Commission report, and following about 8 months, I think that it took us to get to the point where we looked to engage our own experts to give us an opinion that would be the basis of our criminal investigation.
Was there anything preventing police from starting a criminal investigation, though, at the same time as, say, the Building and Housing investigation, etc., were undertaken?
Just that all of the experts that were involved in that part of it would have been the experts that we would have called upon to help us as well.
Peter, if this year and a day thing, if that had been Crown Law's opinion, surely if you'd had it on day one, there would have been no point in this investigation, because what they're saying is it would have barred it anyway. You could have arrived at this decision back at the beginning.
Yes, and the year and a day aspect of it didn't come up until about June or July this year. It was the year and a day was something that we hadn't turned our mind to, and neither had the Crown Solicitor at that stage. So
what was the police recommendation? Did you think there was enough grounds for...
The police recommendation was to prosecute.
Why did that change?
Well, following appropriate legal advice and some obviously lengthy discussion with those legal advisors, we all came to the conclusion that we hadn't met the standard of evidential sufficiency that we needed to. And that is based mainly on the fact that we weren't likely to succeed in any prosecution that we commenced.
How many times did it go back and forth between the police, the Crown prosecutor and
the discussions went on for a number of months.
Are you releasing all of that correspondence and discussion in this?
All of the opinions, the expert opinions, the peer reviews, the police recommendation, and the 2 legal opinions are being released.
With any developments on the CTV building, police have always met face to face with the families before briefing the media. Why have you not done this today?
Well, we did notify the families first.
But they said that you normally meet with them face to face before the media briefed. You haven't met with them today?
No, our normal occurrence is that we provide them with an email briefing, and then we meet with them face to face after that.
But it's only before the media briefing?
And we always knew that once we released our decision to the families, that it would find its way into the media, which has happened on this occasion as well. So, but we have set up to meet with the families, and we also wanted to make sure that the legal experts were there when we met with the families so that there could be a discussion. And that's the earliest opportunity that we can do that is December the 14th.
So as a result of what's happened here, now the Crown Solicitor's gone to the Law Commission looking for some sort of clarification or law change around the year and a day.
It's on the website, you'll see it's in the documents that have been released, so they make comment on that, yes.
That's what's happened as a result.
Yes, that's my understanding.
So if the legal test hasn't been met for the highest charge, why not take a lower charge?
We also considered, we had a discussion with our legal advisors about criminal nuisance, which is the lesser charge. But the lesser charge is actually harder to prove than the negligent manslaughter. There's a higher standard of proof because we have to prove knowledge around recklessness. So it would have been a harder case to actually establish than negligent manslaughter.
Why did you want to prosecute?
As I said, I mean, we've worked closely with these families over a long period of time, and all of the investigators are based in Christchurch and live in Christchurch, and we understand and empathise with them. So all of us, when you think with your heart, think we'd like to prosecute, but when you measure it against what we should be measuring it against, which is the Solicitor General's guidelines, you realise that it doesn't quite get there. And it's very, very finely balanced. It's not an easy decision.
Although you didn't find examples of negligence to satisfy the law, do you still think your investigation turned up examples of negligence?
Yes, definitely. We've established negligence. What we haven't established is gross negligence, which is a higher standard again.
And that's negligence on behalf of?
Negligence on behalf of the engineers for the building. So all of that is laid out in the documents.
What we do hope, though, is one outcome of this is we've raised an awareness that, engineers and other bodies like that need to make sure they do take their duty of care seriously and that they are accountable at the end of the day for the decisions and judgment calls they make. So,
at the same time, they're not accountable because of this year.
Well, we're hoping that as far as the bodies are concerned and any governance group that looks over the top of them take this into account.
Will police be making advice on this law?
We will assist the government if they request it from us.
So do you look at charging just the engineers, or did you look more broadly at other individuals? And organisations?
We started with a range of people and worked our way down to the engineers. So each of the people that we identified as being potentially culpable in this set of circumstances, we went through a process whether we established whether what they'd done was causative of the building collapse and whether it was grossly negligent, and we worked our way down and we got to a final two, which are the engineers. So yeah, it's a matter of elimination.
2 more questions?
Did you, I know it's technical, but in comparison with the board findings of the Royal Commission, were the findings of your technical experts sort of materially different or cast any light on major additional deficiencies that weren't found out by the Royal Commission?
Yes, there were some. I would say that the work that Becca has done for us is more extensive than the Royal Commission in terms of what was discovered. And plus we had the benefit of doing some other investigative work in support of what they had, so what they finally ended up with. So yeah, I think we went further than the Royal Commission. We added to what the Royal Commission actually came up with.
At the end of the day, we just wanted the best for the families, and we totally understand that they'll be disappointed. And like Peter said before, our absolute sympathies and our heartfelt sympathies go out to those families. I'm also very proud of our investigation team, who have spent a large part of their last 4 years working on this case in order to ensure that the truth be found and that justice be found if it needed to be. But at the end of the day, we can only do what we can do with the evidence that we have, and we've done that, and the test that was put to the law hasn't quite been met.
The Teacher Superintendent, I wonder if you'd like to comment on, you've led 2 major terrible investigations, neither of which have resulted in prosecutions. Do you have any comment on the extent to which that may corrode public confidence in the law to be able to find accountability in cases of mass casualty which are preventable?
Well, there are similarities between them, but they're also completely different cases, and they had very, very complex issues in both, but they were different issues for them. So the other investigation you're talking about is the Pike River, which had a completely different set of facts and things that we had to consider. And this one is different again. So I think people should have confidence that we investigate these serious and top-end matters very, very competently and very, very well, and we take them very, very seriously. So we've invested a lot.
At the end of the day, you have to acknowledge that in neither case has there been any accountability before the law.
There hasn't been accountability, but the investigations are very, very complex and very, very difficult, and we have to assess them on the evidence that we actually found.
If the families were to continue their fight, so to speak, would you be supportive of them?
Well, all of the evidence that we've amassed over the 4 years of the investigation would be available to them in limited forms, obviously privacy issues. And as I said, the starting point for them will be all of those documents that have been released on the website, which is a very unusual move for us. We don't normally release legal opinions.
So why did you in this case?
Just because we think that the families in particular need to have an opportunity to look at the documents that were there and the decisions that were made and how they were made, all the evidence that we managed to amass and how it all transpired. So, yeah, we don't want to hold anything back from them.
Will you be releasing the interviews you did with the engineers involved in the building survey?
We offered the engineers the opportunity to be interviewed, and as is their right, they declined.
They couldn't be compelled to
No.
give an interview? Why is that?
Not under criminal law. You cannot be compelled to be interviewed. Everyone has the right to say no.
Did that hinder your investigation at all?
Not really, no. There were other forums that they had spoken in, not only the Royal Commission, but other professional bodies that they'd presented evidence at and spoken to, so those are available to us.
In terms of evidence, was there even the slightest chance that you could lead to or take this to court?
To the point we've got, no. I don't think there's anything out there, any more evidence out there we could wring out of this. We've gathered everything that we could.
What about maybe comments that would say you should have taken it to court regardless of how you think it might have went?
Well, that's the public interest test that we've got to ask ourselves. Is it in the public interest to go to court with a matter where you know that sufficiently the evidence isn't there to gain a conviction?
We have to be consistent with the standards that we measure against. We can't start picking and choosing which ones we're going to disregard the guidelines for, so we have to be consistent.
All right, we'll leave it there, guys. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for your
Thank
time.
you.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
If they do have a look at the police website, there's documents you can do it there now.